On this 24th Sunday in Ordinary Time, our Gospel reading comes from Matthew chapter 18. It begins with Peter asking the question, "Lord, how often must I forgive my brother if he wrongs me? As often as 7 times?" And then comes Jesus' response of, "Not 7, I tell you, but 77 times." Jesus then goes on to tell the parable of the unforgiving servant. The parable details the story of a servant who was forgiven a massive, unrepayable debt, only to refuse forgiveness to another servant who owed a relatively small debt. The crux of the parable is that the mercy and forgiveness of God is ever present, even when we are at our worst, and we are called to seek and share that forgiveness in our everyday lives and with those we meet. More often than not, like the servant in the parable, we want to be forgiven, but it's quite hard to forgive others. The online world and use of social media has made this even more difficult. It has made us quick to judge and slow to forgive. During the summer, a group of 53 young adults represented the Archdiocese of Dublin at World Youth Day in Lisbon. The theme was following in the footsteps of Mary as she arose and went with haste. All in Lisbon were called to arise, to make the world a better place, and that requires many elements, but one in particular is sharing the forgiveness of God. Every World Youth Day has a reconciliation park, full of booths with clergy of all languages, ready to celebrate the sacrament of God's merciful love. And many of our group felt called to receive the sacrament of reconciliation, and some were receiving it for the first time in many years. It led us to have a conversation on the world today, what it's like to be a young person navigating life, and how forgiveness fits in. The conclusion was, it's not the easiest, but we have to trust and hope like Mary did. I asked some of our pilgrims who experienced the Reconciliation Park in Lisbon to share on what does it mean to forgive and what does it mean to be forgiven. Here's what some of them said.
To release someone from their guilt.
For me, what it means to forgive, I always remind myself of the parable of Jesus when he talks about the master and the slave. To forgive means to show mercy, and with that it means that you wholeheartedly forgive them for what they've done and you move past it. And I remind myself that if God was able to forgive me for all my sins and everyone else's sins combined from birth to present, then who am I to not be able to forgive one person for one wrongdoing, or 2 or 3 or 4 or 70. So that for me is what it means to forgive.
To forgive, I think, means to accept somebody's wrongdoings or mistakes that they've made in life. I suppose we all make them.
For me, again, it's having that mercy, feeling that mercy of the person and feeling that empathy off of them, that you're not reminded by your own mistakes. And through that, you could see it by the grace of God, that when you do something wrong, he automatically forgives you and he never reminds you of your past mistakes.
To me, forgiveness means the chance to begin again, start all over, and feeling like a weight has been lifted off your chest.
For me to feel like I'm truly forgiven by others is to not be reminded or feel guilty for what was done. So that in turn makes me feel conscious of how I should react and show others that I have forgiven them. But also when it comes to God, it means to be forgiven that we are forgiven already automatically by God, by his grace. And sometimes we need to remind ourselves of that we don't need to carry sin and feel that guilt consistently, because God loves us so much that he has already forgiven us for what we've done.